Charles Bronson was Hollywood's meanest tough guy, but only one man could make him lose his mind with rage. It wasn't another action star. It wasn't a critic who trashed his movies. It was someone who laughed at his biggest insecurity while filming The Dirty Dozen. The director thought it was just a joke, but Bronson never forgot the humiliation. The hatred ran so deep that 30 years later, he was still talking about revenge. Hollywood's darkest feud is finally exposed. Charles Bronson was never supposed to be famous. He was born Charles Dennis Bukinski in a dirt-poor coal mining town in Pennsylvania, the 11th of 15 children. His parents were Lithuanian immigrants, and their life was about survival. At just 6 years old, he was so poor he had to wear his sister's dress to school because they couldn't afford proper clothes. He didn't speak English back then, only Lithuanian and Russian, which made him feel like an outsider in his own country. That rough, silent strength you see in his movies? It wasn't an act. It was who he had to become to survive. Things got worse when his father died. Bronson was just 10. While other kids played or went to school, he went straight into the coal mines. The work was brutal, dark, dangerous, and suffocating. For 12 hours a day, he dragged coal in narrow tunnels for just $1 a ton. But he never quit. He kept digging, kept pushing, even gave up his own clothes for his younger siblings. Somehow, through all that, he still managed to finish high school, the first in his family to do it. By 21, he saw a chance to escape the mines and joined the Army Air Forces during World War II. As a gunner on a B-29 bomber flying missions over Japan, he faced real danger. On one mission, he got wounded and earned a Purple Heart. But even at war, he felt like life had improved. "I never had it so good," he once said. "I was eating, sleeping well. This was luxury compared to home." People later questioned his service, but his records were real. Bronson had been in the thick of it. After the war, he drifted through jobs until one unexpected opportunity changed everything. He was hired by a small theater company, not to act, but just to paint scenery. But standing near the stage, something clicked. He started taking small parts, and it turned out he had a natural presence. He wasn't loud or flashy, but there was something about him. Soon, he was sharing a tiny apartment in New York with another struggling actor, Jack Klugman. In 1949, he packed up and moved to Hollywood, determined to make something of himself. When Charles Bronson first stepped into Hollywood in 1950, his face told a story of hardship. Rough, weathered, and shaped by a tough childhood, he didn't look like a typical leading man. Casting directors didn't see star power, they saw muscle. A face like stone, made for villains, thugs, and henchmen. Roles with no names, no lines, just a punch to throw or a bullet to take. He wasn't Charles Bronson yet. His real name was Charles Bukinski. But in the middle of the McCarthy-era Red Scare, he knew that name sounded too foreign. So, he changed it to Bronson, borrowing it from the Bronson Gate at Paramount Studios. A small act, but one that helped him survive in a town that wanted all its stars to look, talk, and sound the same. Bronson worked non-stop in the early 1950s, showing up in one film after another. He played background goons, nameless soldiers, and the kind of characters you forget as soon as they leave the screen. Even when he stood next to stars, he was invisible. He didn't smile much, didn't talk much, but his presence lingered. You couldn't ignore him entirely. There was something in his eyes that said, "You don't know me yet, but you will." That moment finally came with Drumbeat in 1954. It was a Western with Alan Ladd, and Bronson played Captain Jack, a Modoc warrior fighting back against the US government. It was based on real events, but Bronson didn't just act. He became that man. He didn't need many words. His expression carried the pride, the pain, the fire. One reviewer said he stole the whole movie. And it wasn't just a compliment, it was a warning shot. Bronson was done being thug number 2. That jail cell scene near the end? It showed a side of him Hollywood had ignored for too long. A sense of humor, a human edge, a natural rhythm that no one saw coming. Drumbeat gave him a seat at the grown-up table. And for the first time, the audience noticed. 4 years later, Bronson got something even bigger. His name at the top of the poster. Machine Gun Kelly wasn't a big-budget film. It was made fast and cheap. But Bronson turned it into something unforgettable. He played the gangster George Kelly, like a man haunted by his own reputation. Strong on the outside, scared on the inside. Susan Cabot played his ruthless girlfriend, and together they created tension that crackled. There's one bank robbery scene with no dialogue at all. Just Bronson's body language and cold stare doing the talking. Critics didn't just like it. They were stunned. It was gritty, raw, and real. People started whispering that maybe, just maybe, this guy could carry a movie. But Hollywood didn't listen. Not yet. Even with that buzz, Bronson still found himself stuck in the shadows. He starred in a TV show called Man with a Camera, and he kept landing solid supporting roles in major films like The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, and The Dirty Dozen. But always as the side character, never the lead. He was already into his 40s when most actors would have given up chasing stardom. Yet Bronson wasn't built for giving up. While American studios overlooked him, Europe saw something else. In France, Italy, and Germany, he was a hero, quiet, cool, and strong. European directors loved his silence, his stare, the tension he carried even when he wasn't speaking. Audiences across the ocean made him a star long before his home country did. It hadn't been easy. For years, Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. He was too ethnic, too rough, not pretty enough. He once joked that he looked like a dynamited rock quarry. And producers agreed. That's why they kept casting him as anything but himself. Native Americans, Mexicans, Greeks, Italians, anyone who looked foreign. But things started to shift when director John Sturges gave him the role of Bernardo O'Reilly in The Magnificent Seven. At 39, he was older than most breakout actors, but this role gave him something new. He played a gunman with a conscience, someone who understood real courage wasn't just about bullets. In one scene, he told village boys that their fathers, who worked the land every day with no reward in sight, were the real heroes. That quiet power stuck with audiences, especially in Europe, where the film became a massive hit. It didn't just launch his international career, it proved Bronson could carry meaning behind the muscles. 3 years later, The Great Escape gave him another chance to show that he wasn't just a tough guy. He played Danny, a soldier with claustrophobia who had to dig tunnels for a daring prison break. The fear in Bronson's eyes wasn't acting. As a child, he had worked in coal mines after his father died. He knew what it felt like to be trapped underground. That raw fear gave the role weight. Director John Sturges cast him specifically to show that the strongest man in the room could still be vulnerable. The result was unforgettable, especially in Europe, where Bronson was already becoming a quiet icon. But while his fame grew, his personal life started unraveling. During the filming of The Great Escape, Bronson fell in love with Jill Ireland. The problem? She was married to his friend and co-star David McCallum. Bronson didn't hide his feelings. While grieving his mother's death and dealing with the collapse of his own marriage, he made a move that shocked everyone. It caused a rift, but it also changed his life. Bronson and Ireland married in 1968, and they stayed together for over 2 decades. She wasn't just his wife, she was his co-star in more than a dozen films. Together, they became one of Hollywood's most recognizable screen couples, especially in the 1970s when Bronson finally became a household name in America. That same tough exterior followed him to The Dirty Dozen, filmed in England in 1966. It was a star-packed war film with more ego than room on set. Bronson didn't make it easier on himself. He kept to himself and often seemed distant. He was already known as Charlie Sunshine on set for his brooding mood, but it wasn't just about attitude. The shoot was hard. Delays stretched filming for months. One day, his co-star Lee Marvin vanished. Turned out he had gone drinking and had to be dragged back from a local pub, barely sobered up for the next scene. It was chaos, but somehow, the film became the biggest hit of 1967, beating out major titles and earning millions. Still, not every memory from that set was a win. Bronson had always been sensitive about his height. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall, and that insecurity caught up with him during a group scene. Director Robert Aldrich thought it would be funny to place Bronson between the 2 tallest actors on set, Clint Walker and Donald Sutherland, both towering over him. The effect was immediate and humiliating. Everyone noticed. Bronson was furious, but Aldrich just laughed. For a man who spent years building a tough guy image, the moment cut deep. It wasn't just a prank, it hit where it hurt. Charles Bronson spent years playing tough guys in the background, while prettier actors took the spotlight. He was in hits like The Magnificent Seven and The Dirty Dozen, but no one in Hollywood gave him the lead. His face was too rough, his presence too intense. While studios kept casting the same clean-cut heroes, Bronson waited. By 1968, he was 47, and still not a leading man in America. So, he packed his bags and went to Europe, just like Clint Eastwood did before him. The difference? Europe saw something Hollywood didn't. They didn't care if he wasn't pretty. They wanted power, grit, real presence. That's when France came calling. Alain Delon, one of the biggest stars in Europe, specifically asked for Bronson to co-star in Adieu l'ami. The producers were blunt. Europe doesn't care about pretty faces, they care about character. And when that movie hit theaters, it was electric. French audiences were obsessed. The film made millions, and Bronson finally got the screen time he deserved. The chemistry between him and Delon was raw and riveting. Critics noticed, and so did the box office. Right after that, fate gave Bronson a second shot. Sergio Leone, the mastermind behind The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, offered Bronson the role of a mysterious, harmonica-playing gunman in Once Upon a Time in the West. Years earlier, Bronson had turned down Leone's offer for a fistful of dollars, the role that launched Eastwood. Now, Leone got his man, and it was worth the wait. The film exploded across Europe. In Paris, it ran for a full year. In Italy, Germany, France, Bronson was everywhere. Leone even said Bronson was the best actor he ever worked with. That silent stare, the tension in every movement, people couldn't take their eyes off him. Then came Rider on the Rain, a moody French thriller that won a Golden Globe and pushed Bronson even further into legend status. More hits followed: Cold Sweat, Violent City, Red Sun, each one built for Bronson's stoic style. Directors wrote scripts just for him. These weren't just roles, they were showcases for everything Hollywood had ignored. In each film, he played the same kind of man: quiet, dangerous, moral to the core. And audiences loved it. Women adored him. Men wanted to be him. When he returned to Hollywood in the early 1970s, he wasn't just another face. He was a million-dollar man. By 1973, he was earning $1 million per movie, something almost unheard of back then. At age 52, when most actors fade, Bronson's real journey was just beginning. One of the men who helped shape Bronson's most iconic roles was British director Michael Winner. The two teamed up on multiple films, and their chemistry was undeniable. Bronson's quiet, deadly calm mixed perfectly with Winner's taste for gritty violence. Their first project together was Chatto's Land, and it only got bloodier from there. When they made Death Wish, it wasn't supposed to be so brutal. Another director had been in line for the job, but Winner didn't flinch from the dark stuff. He pushed the film to its limits. Bronson, always the silent type, became the face of vengeance. And audiences? They loved it. The more critics hated the violence, the more people showed up to watch. Before all that, though, Bronson redefined the hitman role in The Mechanic. He played a killer who said almost nothing, but moved with chilling precision. The film opened with nearly 16 minutes of silence. Just Bronson planning a hit. No talking, just tension. That performance showed just how powerful silence could be. The original script had even darker undertones, an openly gay relationship between the hitman and his apprentice. But the studios cut that out. Still, what remained was powerful. Bronson made cold, calculated murder feel like an art form. He even made sure his wife, Jill Ireland, got a role in the film, just like he would in many of his others. Bronson wasn't a one-trick pony. In Chatto's Land, he played a half Apache out for revenge after his wife is assaulted. In The Stone Killer, he was a no-nonsense cop chasing mafia killers. Two very different characters, but Bronson made both feel real. Off-camera, things didn't always go smoothly. One of the stunts went so wrong that a crew member nearly died, and the car rental company freaked out so badly they tried to take their cars back mid-shoot. Michael Winner didn't take that well. But these two movies helped lock in the Bronson brand. The quiet avenger, the brutal justice dealer. These were the roles that set the stage for what came next. Then came the real turning point. By the mid-1970s, Bronson wasn't just a movie star, he was the biggest box office draw in the world. Bigger than Clint Eastwood, bigger than Paul Newman. While other stars carefully curated their images, Bronson did the opposite. He avoided interviews, didn't smile for the press, just made movies and let the silence do the talking. Death Wish pulled in massive numbers. Made for just a few million, it earned more than 10 times that. The studios finally realized that international fame could matter more than domestic press. And Bronson? He kept doing what he always did, staring down the camera like he had nothing to prove. The role of Paul Kersey in Death Wish became the one Bronson couldn't shake. He played a quiet architect whose life is ripped apart when his wife is murdered and his daughter assaulted. A man who hated violence suddenly found himself picking up a gun. The transformation was shocking. The fact that Bronson was already 52 made it feel even more real. He turned into the kind of man many secretly wished they could become. Cold, fearless, and unstoppable. But behind the scenes, Bronson had boundaries. He refused to let his real wife play the on-screen victim. "I don't want her messed around," he told the director. That was Bronson. Tough, but protective. When Death Wish hit theaters, it lit a fuse. America was reeling from rising crime and broken trust in government. Suddenly, this gritty film about street justice felt like more than just a movie. Critics hated it, called it dangerous, called it racist. But audiences? They couldn't get enough. People walked out of theaters wanting to buy guns. Some even shouted, "Death Wish," when they saw Bronson on the street, as if he really was Paul Kersey. The line between the actor and the character had started to blur. Even the author of the original book was horrified. He'd written it as a warning, but the public made Bronson their hero. The streets of 1970s New York were dark and full of fear, trash everywhere. Graffiti. People afraid to walk alone. Into that world came Bronson, with his silent stare and hidden pistol. For many, it felt like the movie was holding up a mirror to their daily lives. Some neighborhoods even started calling themselves Kersey Patrols. That's how deep the impact ran. Law enforcement began to worry. Would real people try to take the law into their own hands? Bronson had become more than a movie star. He was a symbol. Whether that was good or bad depended on who you asked. But all that fame came with a cost. Bronson didn't love the spotlight, and he definitely didn't love what the character of Kersey had turned into. In interviews, he seemed tired of it all. He said he felt like a funhouse mirror version of himself, stretched out, distorted. Fans knew him as a killer, but at home, he painted and sculpted. He was a quiet man who liked peace. As the Death Wish sequels got more over the top, Bronson pulled back emotionally. "I just go through the motions," he admitted. In Death Wish 3, he was mowing down gangs with machine guns. It didn't feel real anymore. Even Bronson thought it had gone too far. Still, he kept returning to the role. Money talked. So did contracts. From the original in 1974 to the final one in 1994, Bronson played Kersey for 2 decades. With each film, the character became more extreme. What started as a broken man with a gun became an urban soldier, fighting crack dealers and warlords. Charles Bronson's love story begins far from the fame and grit of Hollywood. He was a broke, 26-year-old coal miner when he met Harriet Tendler, a teenager from a well-off family, at an acting school in Philadelphia. On their first date, he had only 4 cents in his pocket. But there was something raw and determined about him that caught Harriet's attention. Despite her father's concerns, they married in 1949. For years, she supported both of them, while Bronson chased his dream, waiting for a big break that felt like it might never come. Eventually, it did. Films like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape made his name known. But success came at a price. Their marriage, once built on sacrifice and hope, began to fall apart. By the time Bronson was on the edge of stardom in 1965, the two went their separate ways. Harriet later wrote a book about their life together, not bitter, but honest. She remembered him as a man who was far from perfect, but still a devoted father, a surprisingly talented painter, and someone who never stopped pushing forward. Around the same time, another woman entered Bronson's life in the most unexpected way. Jill Ireland was visiting her husband, David McCallum, on the set of The Great Escape, when Bronson reportedly said something bold, "I'm going to marry your wife." Whether he said it or not, 5 years later, it happened. Ireland divorced McCallum in 1967. Bronson finalized his own divorce 2 years earlier. Then, in 1968, Bronson and Ireland married. Instead of drama and bitterness, McCallum kept his dignity, later saying he never held a grudge. For Bronson and Ireland, it was the beginning of a long and unique partnership, one that would stretch across 2 decades and more than a dozen films. Their bond wasn't just about love, it became the foundation of Bronson's career from that point on. Between 1970 and 1987, Bronson made sure Jill Ireland was in almost every movie he did. 15 films in total. They weren't just co-stars, they were partners in every sense. Their life together was nomadic, constantly shifting locations depending on where Bronson's next project was. Still, they made it work. With 7 children between them, 2 from Bronson's side, 3 from Ireland's, and 2 they adopted together, they built a life that mixed Hollywood glamour with a kind of strange, mobile normalcy. Their main home was in Bel Air, but they also had a farmhouse in Vermont and a snowy escape in Colorado. Jill raised horses, and Bronson stayed focused on his work. Together, they created a life that looked nothing like the gritty violence of the movies. Behind the scenes, Bronson was a different man. He was shy. So shy, in fact, he couldn't watch his own films. He had a quiet side, one that loved painting and family dinners more than red carpets. Even though he was once the highest-paid actor in the world, he lived like a man who still remembered coal dust and hunger. Jill once shared a moment that captured his duality. When she complained about a director mistreating her, Bronson calmly walked over and physically shook some sense into the man. It was that intense loyalty, that protective edge, that made him who he was. But nothing could protect them from what came next. In 1984, Jill was diagnosed with breast cancer. The same man who had played violent vigilantes on screen now stood helpless beside his wife. For 6 years, she fought the disease with incredible courage. She spoke out publicly, wrote 2 memoirs, and even testified in front of Congress. She didn't just survive, she inspired. In 1990, she passed away at their Malibu home. Bronson was devastated. He cremated her, placed her ashes inside a walking cane, and carried it with him everywhere for the rest of his life. For all the movies and millions, she was what mattered most. Then came an odd twist in Bronson's story, one he never asked for. In 1987, a British criminal named Michael Gordon Peterson legally changed his name to Charles Bronson. He did it during a brief moment of freedom, supposedly for boxing promotion purposes. The irony? He had never seen a single Bronson film. Still, the name stuck, and from that point forward, Peterson built an entirely new and terrifying reputation under it. Over the next few decades, he would become known as Britain's most dangerous prisoner. Peterson's story spiraled fast. After his release, he bought a water pistol, turned it into a fake weapon, and forced a stranger to drive him across town. He got involved with the infamous Cray twins, boxed illegally, and even robbed a jewelry store on New Year's Day. Just 6 days later, he was arrested again. But now, he was no longer Michael Peterson. He was Charles Bronson. That name, borrowed from a Hollywood legend, became a symbol of chaos and violence in the UK's prison system. What's most bizarre is how seriously Peterson committed to the act. He built a reputation on brutality, holding hostages, attacking guards, staging rooftop protests, and even demanding a helicopter and a cup of tea during one siege. His most infamous moment came in 1999 when he held an art teacher hostage for 44 hours. The result? A life sentence. Over the years, he has spent most of his time in solitary confinement. Despite repeated parole hearings, he remains behind bars, his name permanently tied to someone he never met and never watched on screen. In 2008, the line between these two lives blurred even more. A low-budget film called Bronson hit theaters, starring Tom Hardy as the infamous British prisoner. Hardy bulked up for the role, met Peterson in person, and gave a chilling performance that earned critical praise. Peterson, who finally got to see the movie years later, loved it. He said Hardy captured him perfectly. But the film only added to the confusion. Many still mix up the prisoner with the actor, forgetting that one was a screen legend and the other a violent convict. Strangely enough, Peterson eventually tried to separate himself from the name that made him infamous. In 2014, he announced he'd changed his name to Charles Salvador, in honor of the artist Salvador Dali. Bronson was a nasty bastard, he said. I didn't like him. It was his attempt to start over, even while stuck behind prison walls. Through it all, the real Charles Bronson, the actor, remained quiet. He never publicly responded to the bizarre identity theft. Maybe he didn't care, or maybe, being the intensely private man he was, he preferred silence over spectacle. One thing's for sure, no matter how many headlines the British prisoner made, the real Charles Bronson had already left his mark. Through a lifetime of unforgettable films, deep loyalty, and a love story that refused to fade.